Hi. Remember, poetry is a literary piece of work in which a writer attempts to stir a reader's imagination and emotions with words and sounds. I have a piece of work called Borrowed Black here that I'd like to share with you, and it is a poem called A Labrador Fantasy written by Bryan, Obed, and the illustrations are done by Jan Mogensen. And so this is a really intriguing piece of work. So on the inside of the cover, I always like to share that because sometimes kids don't understand that this is kind of like a little introduction to what the book is about. It's very interesting. It says, no one who belongs to Labrador knows where Borrowed Black lived before. He came to stay on the tall, dark shore on the wildest tickle of Labrador. Thus begins the dramatic tale of Borrowed Black, a being created from borrowed items held together by greed. One fateful night, he borrows the moon, but it shatters into pieces, 1,000,000,004. So Borrowed Black buries the silver shards in the deep water of Labrador. The night now had nothing of silver to hold. The winds were crying, the rocks were cold, the air was thick and dark and chill, and no one could tell where the sea met the hill. Into this desperate situation sails an unlikely collection of heroes, cabbage captain and the curious crew, who are determined to return the moon to its rightful place. Bryan, Obed's haunting story of this bizarre, cobbled together being is destined to become a classic. This bleak drama of Jan Mogensen's illustrations captures the greedy spirit of Borrowed Black, as well as the courage of those who dare to challenge him. So there are some words that we use there that I'm thinking that maybe you didn't know what they meant. So on the back here, it says special things to know about Labrador. I think it's a good idea to know these words before I read this piece to you. And so one I know that probably caught you off guard was belongs to. This expression is used in Labrador when speaking of where a person is born or where a person comes from. Labrador is the mainland area of the Canadian province of Newfoundland, north of the Strait of Belle Isle. So that, I bet you didn't know where Labrador was. And some you already know, like cabbage and an eel, maybe you know what that is. It's not a true eel. This refers to an eel-like fish called the rock eel, brownish gray and small, and about 4 to 6 inches. The rock eel is often found at the low tide mark in little pools of water left by the ebb of the tide. If you know what a fisherman is, it refers to women, children, and men who fish. A floe, also called an ice pan, is a piece of floating ice with a flat surface. When floes drift close to one another and merge, they form pack ice. In late spring, when the harbor ice breaks up, the children on Labrador coast like to jump from floe to floe. Wow. Seals are often seen sunning themselves on the floes at the edge of the pack ice. A gale is a strong wind reaching sometimes 32 to 63 miles per hour. This goose they're talking about is the Canada goose, which nests on the ground near water. Canadian geese make their nests of sticks and grasses and line them with down. The eggs can be off-white, dull green, or yellowish. And Jaeger, this swift seabird, reminds many people of gulls or seagulls. Noted for its graceful flight, the Jaeger robs other birds of food. This is the method it uses. It chases gulls in turns and causes them to drop their food. Then it swoops to catch the food before it hits the water. Jaeger breeds in the Arctic and subarctic and migrates along the Pacific and Atlantic coasts and winter at sea. So the Labrador, this is the expression used when referring to the Labrador coast of Newfoundlanders that go fishing down on the Labrador. Partridge, this is a name given to 4 species of large fish that Newfoundlanders hunt for food. The willow ptarmigan, the rock ptarmigan, and the spruce grouse and ruffed grouse. So those are some words that you'll probably wonder what they mean, but now you don't. So I am going to start the beginning of this piece. It has some scary pictures in it too, so I hope you don't get scared. Borrowed Black, a Labrador fantasy. No one who belongs to the Labrador knows where Borrowed Black lived before. He came to stay on the tall, dark shore, on the wildest tickle of Labrador. Some say he came like a wolf through the snow. Some say he came like a seal on a floe. Some say he came like a Jaeger in flight. Some say he came like fog in the night. He burrowed the ugliest rock he could find, where the wind like a husky howled and whined, where the sea came hissing and slapping inside, where urchins and eels floated in on the tide. He borrowed the boards from boats he had found, some that were floating, some that had drowned. He built a shack for the wickedest weather, caught 200 creatures to hold it together. He stayed there, yet no one would visit his shack, for Borrowed Black borrowed, but never gave back. He borrowed his hands from the paws of a bear, a patch of brown seaweed he borrowed for hair. His eyes were a wolf's, and he borrowed to hear 2 empty seashells, 1 for each year. He borrowed the beak of a gull for a nose. He cut off the sails of his schooner for clothes. Thin shells of goose eggs he had for his face. His bones were dried driftwood shivered in place. He walked on seal flippers. They were his feet. Borrowed some whale's teeth so that he could eat. He'd gotten the borrowing wind for his heart. It held him together, each small borrowed part. And some of that wind he often would use to borrow whenever, whatever he'd choose. That wind he kept on the windowsill in a fish skin sack so it could not spill. One night, Borrowed Black went out with his sack to borrow the moon, but on his way back, the moon broke into pieces, 1,000,000,004. So he buried them deep off the Labrador. Borrowed Black greedily grinned with pleasure, for he had just borrowed magnificent treasure. The night now had nothing of silver to hold. The winds were crying. The rocks were cold. The air was thick and dark and chill, and no one could tell where the sea met the hill. Shivering rabbits waited for day. Hungry owls sought but couldn't find prey. Partridge and fox in the woodlands nearby trembled in fright beneath the dark sky. The fishermen knew in the nearby town they'd seen who had taken the silver moon down, but they feared going near the ugly shack to ask for the moon from Borrowed Black. Borrowed Black slept on a stump by his door, dreaming of silver with an ocean snore. 17 seasons of night went by with not a piece of moon in the sky. And no moon. Then one night from the north in a gale came the boat that was built in the back of a whale, with a tail for its sail and a 50-foot spout that a sculpin would climb with his spy to look out. Wow, what a boat. Now the sculpin had seen, some seasons before, the moon taken down and buried offshore. He had seen through the night borrowed black go, so he told captain who was steering below. For 17 seasons along Labrador, they had searched for borrowed black's shack on the shore. When they came to a tickle this night in the storm, with stovepipe beard coughing to keep the boat warm, Mousemate chattered, "There's something on shore. I hear through the gale a terrible snore." The sculpin could spy a small black shack through the weather that 200 creatures held tightly together. Chewing on cabbage and trying to steer, the captain cried, "Anchor! Borrowed black must live here." Up leaped Sinky's sailor, who was happy and round and always laughing but making no sound. He jumped to the tickle, a rope in his hand, to sit on the bottom while the crew got to land. The curious crew of 9 shapes and sizes couldn't stop looking about for surprises, over and under and in what they passed, everywhere mumbling and everywhere fast. They paddled to shore, and on an old knotted log, Mousemate first peering into the fog. When they reached the shore, Mousemate crept up to the shack where borrowed black slept. The curious crew were left far behind, looking over and under the things they could find. When he looked to the windowsill, Mousemate grinned, for there was the sack with the borrowing wind. Still borrowed black slept on his stump by the door, dreaming of silver with an ocean snore. In Mousemate tiptoed and picked up the sack, but he squeaked as he scurried out through the crack. Borrowed black heard. He opened one eye and saw Mousemate with the sack gone by. He cried out, "That wind is part of my heart. If you don't give it back, I'll soon fall apart." He chased Mousemate down the rocks in the fog. Mousemate squeaked as he jumped to the log. "Tell us, borrowed black, where the moon piece is he, you'll not have your wind till the moon's in the sky." So borrowed black boarded and pointed the way, far off and deep down where the moon pieces lay. Mousemate let the wind from its sack to gather the pieces of moon to take back. The wind tried to mend the moon with its blow, but the moon simply broke when the wind let go. So the wind, thoughtful of night and its kin, would not return to the sack again. It stayed in the moon, and as night became day, borrowed black fell apart and each part blew away. His ugly shack shook till the boards burst free. The 200 creatures went back to the sea. And to this very night on the Labrador, when you stand and watch from the tall, dark shore, you can see cracks in the moon, round and high, and the silver it left on its way to the sky. And fishermen say if you follow the trail, you'll come to the boat in the back of the whale. Borrowed black.